On 5 News tonight, life in jail for the oddball who murdered a young woman. Should an HIV prevention drug be funded by the NHS? And the man accused of trying to assassinate Donald Trump. India Chip Chase had been on a night out with friends. Nightclub CCTV caught 52-year-old Edward Tenniswood promising to get her home safely. Instead, he killed her. AIDS campaigners force the NHS to consider funding a drug that can prevent HIV. But is the money better spent elsewhere? Plus, as Michael Sandford waits in jail in the States, charged with trying to kill Donald Trump, his mum tells us why he should be sent home. Also tonight, the ever-increasing struggle to get onto the property ladder. Millions of people are having to abandon their dreams of owning their own homes, and the problem is right across the country. And Olympic cyclist Lizzie Armistead is clear to compete in Rio after challenging a ban for missing drugs tests, but not everyone is pleased for her. Welcome to 5 News Tonight. I'm Danny Sinha. She was a 20-year-old girl alone and in tears outside a nightclub. He was 52 and described as an oddball who offered to help her. But India Chip Chase didn't want to go with Edward Tenniswood, so he persevered and cajoled, telling her he'd get her home safely. Instead, though, he lured her to her death. Today, he was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years for India's rape and murder. Her father says he'll never really recover from losing her and will suffer until his very last breath. Charlotte Grant reports.
A doctor's daughter who dreamed of one day becoming a paramedic. 20-year-old India Chip Chase had been on a night out in Northampton. CCTV captures her on her phone, alone outside a club. That's when Edward Tenniswood moves in. India is upset, drunk and separated from her friends. More than 30 years older than her, Tenniswood claimed she made the first move. But here, his face close to hers, he's seen cajoling her. He was overheard telling India he'd get her home safe. Eventually, he lures her to a taxi, the last time India was seen alive. Described as a fantasist and a loner, this is the house where Tenniswood lived and where India died. His possessions covered in plastic, and the bedroom where he said they'd shared a loving evening. Tenniswood claimed he'd killed India by accident, but after he'd raped and murdered her, he didn't call an ambulance and instead went drinking at a nearby hotel. It was there that police arrested him the next day. He told them, "I suppose you've been to the house, you found what you're looking for." Today, Edward Tenniswood was jailed for a minimum of 30 years, police describing him as the worst kind of predator. As for his victim, it was left to India's father to describe the family's grief.
Speaking from a father's perspective, I do not want any other father to hear that their daughter's gone missing like I did. And then for them to hear she's been found dead. No other father will have to see their daughter's body in the mortuary and be told they are unable to touch her or kiss her one last time. No other father will have to carry her coffin into a church with his son. And no other father will have to see her mother and siblings grief at the church service.
That was Jeremy Chip Chase and the murder of his daughter India, ending that report by Charlotte Grant. HIV campaigners have won a court battle over whether the NHS should fund a drug that can prevent the virus. NHS England had said it was up to local councils to provide the drug PrEP, which was hugely successful in trials. But the High Court has told NHS bosses they must now consider providing it to the most at risk. Well, PrEP is a pill that should be taken every day to prevent the user contracting HIV. If taken properly, it can reduce the risk by up to 99%. And it costs £400 per person for the month-long course. Well, it is intended for use by people at high risk of contracting the virus, such as those with a partner who is HIV positive. And in the UK, there are around 100,000 people living with HIV. Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Yousef Azad from the National AIDS Trust, who took this case to court, and I asked him for his reaction to today's ruling.
It's a big victory because 17 people a day in the UK are being newly diagnosed with HIV. And though we've promoted safer sex for 30 years, there is still a significant rate of HIV transmission, and it seems like we need new prevention options to add to those we already have to reduce the high rate of HIV transmissions that we've got in the UK. And
like you said, it is welcome news. You need other ways of doing things, but it does come with a price tag. This is a hefty amount of money, isn't it? £400 per month per person.
First thing to say is that that price, which could be negotiated down by the Department of Health, will only be in place for another 18 months. And then the patent ends on the drug, and any company can produce it, and they will compete, and the price will drop significantly. The second point is to think about the cost of preventing HIV compared with the cost of treating someone for a lifetime. And it's always cheaper temporarily to provide someone with PrEP to prevent HIV happening than to spend a whole lifetime treating them.
Sure, so in the long run this could be the cheaper option.
Absolutely. Prevention is better than treatment in that sense.
I do have to put it to you because NHS England, they say if they do decide to fund this drug, they may not be able to afford other treatments and services. Just to give you a flavour, drugs for children with cystic fibrosis, prosthetics for lower limbs. So there are some serious questions, aren't there, as to who or what is more worthy.
I don't think that's the way we should look at it, and I find that surprising from the NHS, to pit one bit of healthcare against another, to say if we fund hip replacements then we can't fund life-saving cancer drugs, or if we fund cystic fibrosis then we can't fund HIV prevention. In the end, what's important is that the NHS is adequately funded to provide cost-effective treatments to those who need them. So we're not going to enter the game of pitting one health condition against another. PrEP is cost-effective, HIV is a very serious condition, and the NHS needs to step up and provide PrEP to those at high risk.
I want to put a question to you, because we have asked for viewers' comments. Stephen Dickens, he wrote to us on Facebook, and he says the NHS should not fund this. The taxpayer does not fund irresponsible life choices. I mean, that is a feeling that some people have.
Well, I wouldn't agree that contracting HIV is necessarily the result of an irresponsible life choice, but let's put that aside. The most important thing from a taxpayer's point of view, and those who might access PrEP are themselves taxpayers, is that we're spending NHS money wisely. Going back to the point I made, it is not caring for taxpayers' money to be willing to spend hundreds of millions of pounds treating people who you could have kept HIV-free by giving them much cheaper HIV prevention.
That was Yousef Azad from the National AIDS Trust speaking to me earlier on. Thousands of people have gathered in Normandy for the funeral of the 85-year-old priest who was murdered last week. Father Jacques Hamel was killed at his church by two men who'd pledged allegiance to so-called Islamic State. The pair stormed the church and held hostages before being shot dead by police when they tried to leave. The mother of a British man who said he wanted to kill Donald Trump has told 5 News she's terrified her son will die in prison. Michael Sandford is accused of trying to grab a police officer's gun at a rally in Las Vegas, but his mum Lynn says he has a history of mental health problems and wouldn't have understood the consequences of his actions. Julian Drucker has this report.
Led out by police and booed by the audience. This is 20-year-old Michael Sandford, seconds after he'd allegedly tried to shoot Donald Trump. The next stop was a Nevada prison cell as the presidential nominee carried on unabashed.
Thank you.
Mr. Sandford, who has autism and severe mental health problems, now awaits trial and a potential prison sentence of 30 years. His family say he's struggling to cope and claim he's being held shackled and in handcuffs.
I don't want my son to die in prison. He's been on suicide watch for 3 weeks. He's attempted suicide twice in the past. He's extremely fragile, you know, and that's why we need to get him back here to get him help and so that his family can support him through this.
Michael Sandford allegedly tried to snatch a police officer's gun at the rally. Court documents show he told a US Secret Service agent his plan was, in his words, to shoot and kill Trump. Lynn Sandford stresses her son has since shown remorse and regret and last phoned her from the prison on Sunday.
He kept breaking down and sort of breaking off, sort of sobbing, saying how sorry he was.
And you're not defending his alleged behaviour,
Of course
are
not,
you?
no. I mean, what he attempted to do was a very serious thing.
Now the family's British lawyer is to submit evidence of his health issues in an appeal for clemency.
Michael did not know what he was doing, that he's not fit to stand trial, and that he should be repatriated back to the UK.
The Foreign Office says it's providing assistance to Mr Sandford's family, with his trial due to start in 3 weeks. Julian Drucker, 5 News.
Olympic cyclist Lizzie Armistead has been told she can now compete at the Rio Olympics after facing the prospect of a 2-year ban for missing drugs tests. Lizzie, who won Team GB's first medal at London 2012, incurred 3 violations for 3 violations in 12 months. But after an appeal, the Court of Arbitration for Sport declared that one of those was not her fault and they overturned her ban. There is absolutely no suggestion Lizzie Armistead is guilty of doping, and she said in the past, "I've always been and will always be a clean athlete." And she's been very vocal in my anti-doping stance throughout my career. That is what she's said. Well, Lizzie will be one of the favourites in this Sunday's road race, but a reprieve has caused something of a stir among other athletes. Well, we can now join Rob Moore, who's a sports journalist in Rio. He's covering the Games. And Rob, what do you make of all of this?
It's an embarrassment for Lizzie, first of all. It's an embarrassment for British cycling. The timing of this coming out less than a week it merged, or less than days, I should say, before her event on Sunday, which could affect her preparation. As you say, she's not guilty of anything other than missing the tests. She's had this Olympic reprieve, but it's a very sad situation for everyone involved in Team GB heading into the Rio Games, which starts on Friday.
Let's break down some of those thoughts. You said it's embarrassing. I mean, obviously, there's divided opinion about this. We've got the UK anti-doping lot saying they want to know why she's been cleared. Of course, British cycling, they feel very differently. People really do have their own differing opinions on this one, don't they?
They do indeed. Purchase, who's 2008 Beijing Olympic champion in rowing, said it was a monumental failure on the behalf of CAS. He almost accused them of hypocrisy, saying that if Lizzie had been Russian, she would have been perhaps dealt with more severely. So there is dividing opinions, basically, because athletes have to give an hour of their time to the testers every day, and you're expected to fulfill that. Now, Lizzie has had 3 strikes. 1 has now been taken off her record, but it is something that athletes have to accept now for clean sport. You have to accept to give an hour of your time every day.
So you are a sports journalist. I mean, do you know more about the process? I mean, just how easy is it to fall foul of the system?
There's about a handful, probably half a dozen, I should say, athletes who have currently missed 2 tests. And if they get 1 more failure within that 12-month period, they could be suspended for up to 2 years. So it is relatively common that you miss 1 or 2 cases. But Tina Rugu, we all remember, was banned for a year in 2006 from athletics for missing 3 tests. She wasn't there at the allocated time. So it has happened, but it's not something that happens all the time to athletes.
So some carelessness on somebody's part, but it's not just this athlete, is it? Presumably, what about the team around her?
Well, it's going to affect preparation because she's going to be competing with Emma Pooley and Nikki Harry.
It looks like we have lost our guest from Rio. As you can imagine, it's a long way to come, but Rob Moore, we got the gist there. Well, coming up on 5 News tonight, the 2-year-old who survived the worst case of chickenpox his doctor had ever seen. Now Jasper's mum wants all children to be vaccinated.
Children do die from chickenpox. Very rare, but they do die. And it's not a risk I think that any parent should take with their children's lives.
And the man who's rowed nearly 2,500 miles across the Pacific, and he did it for his dad. We'll see you after the break. Welcome back. You're watching 5 News Tonight. Now, do you own your own home? If so, you could consider yourself lucky. New figures out today show home ownership across England is at its lowest level for 30 years. Basically, not enough houses are being built and too few can afford those that actually do exist. Well, it means millions of people are having to give up on their dreams of owning their very own place. Peter Lane reports now from Manchester, the city that's seen the biggest slump.
At 33 years old, Tom Barlow thought he'd be on his way to owning a home in Manchester by now, but it is still very much a case of window shopping only, so he's renting instead.
When you do have a look in the estate agents and you do look at house prices, you do think it's unreachable. And it's not just me, it's just all of my friends, it's everyone that I know. And you know, we're all in a situation where unless your parents have got a large amount of money and can give you your deposit, saving for a deposit is just, you know, out of the question.
As cities like Manchester have boomed, home ownership has dropped from its peak just after the millennium to 1980s levels, wages lagging behind prices, high rents getting in the way of saving a deposit. Now, we're used to house price stories focusing on London, of course, but today's figures show just how much home ownership has fallen right across the UK in around the last decade. The biggest drop was here in Greater Manchester, down from 72% to 58%. Other double-digit drops were in West Yorkshire, where it fell from 70% to 60%, the West Midlands, 70% down to 59%, and Northern Ireland, a fall from 73% to 63%. Manchester City Council is developing mortgage guarantee and deposit savings schemes to help people get on the ladder. But the man running it all says maybe the bigger picture is changing.
Nobody's very clear yet as to whether or not we're seeing a cultural shift in this country where people actually make choices around renting rather than buying. I think at the moment there's still a deep psyche that you want to buy, but will that still be the same in the next 10 years? We're not really sure.
Many of those who do dream of buying question if they can make it a reality.
I do worry about my future ever having my own home. I guess I've had to try and get used to the idea that owning my own home may never happen.
And for Tom, every month's rent is another chunk of money gone that could have been put towards his own home. Peter Lane, 5 News.
Well, it does feel like we've been talking about a lack of affordable housing for years now. So why is the problem so hard to fix? Here's our political editor, Andy Bell. He's been finding out.
We've heard the promises from previous Prime Ministers.
We are also going to build more houses. I think everybody knows that there's a huge shortage.
I want us to build 1 million homes by 2020.
But house building in England has gone down from a peak in 2007. It's no longer falling, but is still well below the government's own target of 200,000 homes a year. It's a priority identified by the new Prime Minister.
If you're young, you'll find it harder than ever before to own your own home.
This stretch of the Thames is an extreme example of what's going on in much of the country. Homes are being built, they're just unaffordable for most people looking to buy or even rent. It's all become more expensive because the supply of homes is not keeping up with demand and hasn't done for decades.
The last time that we built the number of houses that we needed, we had a very big public sector house building program with local authorities, house builders, housing associations, everyone playing their part, and that's no longer the case.
Under David Cameron, the focus was less on building and more on schemes like Help to Buy. And 300,000 people have got onto the property ladder through such measures. And the new housing minister, in post just a few days, says he wants to keep that focus.
If you help some people that can't currently own into home ownership, that actually also helps people that are in the private rented sector or on council waiting lists, because it removes some of the pressure in those sectors. So it's a policy that actually helps everybody.
Officially, the policy to build 1 million new homes by 2020 still stands. Hitting that target would go a long way to making housing more affordable to many more people, if it ever happens. Andy Bell, 5 News.
Well, we can now speak to Stephen Clark from the Resolution Foundation, who are behind this report. Hi there, Stephen. Good to have you with us.
Hello.
We know this has been a big problem in London for years, but it's now a problem right through the UK. I mean, how serious have things got?
Very serious. I mean, we've seen the biggest declines in Greater Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, and yes, out of London, but the housing crisis is spreading.
So government schemes such as Help to Buy, so people can buy their own homes, those affordable houses, those sort of schemes, they appear not to go far enough. I mean, what do you think needs to happen here?
Well, a lot of those schemes kind of tend to just help those who could probably already buy, but buy a bit quicker and perhaps save them some money, whereas what we really need is for more homes to be built. We also have to accept that there'll be more people living in the private rented sector and that things need to be improved in that sector so that it's affordable and secure for lots of those people.
Well, let's just talk about that, because we do place a lot of importance, don't we, on people buying their own homes. It's very important to do that. But what about renting? Because lots of other countries, they think renting is the way forward. I'm thinking countries such as France and Germany, where renting is far more common. Does owning a home have to be the be-all and end-all?
Not necessarily, although survey after survey shows that the majority of people want to own their own home. But also we know from in those countries that rents are generally more secure, they're longer tenancies, they're less expensive, whereas we know here that if you're private renting, you will be spending more of your income on housing than if you have a mortgage. And obviously most people want to therefore have a mortgage to save themselves money. That's
another problem. You mentioned income there, because house prices, they're going up a lot faster than people's pay packets, aren't they? And some people, if they're lucky enough, have been relying on the bank of mum and dad. I mean, is that even more common?
It's difficult to get figures around that, but we do know that house prices have kept going up since 2003 and incomes have flatlined or gone down, so it's not hard to understand why more people can't afford it.
Is it time then to bring back 100% mortgages? Because we know with that come their own set of dangers.
I think that's more, again, a thing that would increase maybe demand, but not increase supply, which is the big thing. We need more houses to be built, otherwise we will just simply see more prices continue to rise.
OK, so really just from your point of view, you think the government could do a little bit more?
I think, the government's accepted it's a problem, and hopefully, them and the private sector can get together and, build more homes.
OK, lovely to have your thoughts. Thank you very much, Stephen Clark. A mum is calling on the government to make a vaccination against chickenpox free for all on the NHS. Sarah Allen's 2-year-old son spent 5 days in hospital fighting the usually mild illness. He became so ill he had to be put on a drip and morphine. Well, Jasper has now made a full recovery, but the pictures of him in Catherine Jones's report show him when he was unwell, and you may find them distressing.
I think they were all pretty shocked when we walked in, and I pulled the hood back of the pram and they were just like, oh my God.
5 days in hospital with the most severe case of chickenpox that the doctors and nurses had ever seen.
We couldn't hold him, we couldn't pick him up, cuddle him, because he was in so much pain. Yeah, it was quite hard seeing him so poorly.
A fortnight later, 2-year-old Jasper's scars are healing, but his experience has led his parents to call for all children to be vaccinated against chickenpox as part of the national immunisation programme.
My child was in hospital for 5 days, and if I was on the other side of the fence and that was someone else's child, I'd be instantly getting mine vaccinated against it, because children do die from chickenpox. Very rare, but they do die, and it's not a risk I think that any parent should take with their children's lives.
Some countries do routinely give kids the vaccine, among them Australia, the USA, Japan and 6 of our European neighbours, including Germany. But experts in the UK have refused to recommend a national programme because it's predicted it would cause an increase in adult chickenpox and a rise in cases of shingles, which is caused by the same virus, and because a programme would take 50 years to become cost-effective. This GP believes the current approach is the correct one.
The reason this case has made the headlines is because it is so rare. Chickenpox is a mild illness. It's not like meningitis where 10% of children who get it will die. So you can't really use it as justification to spend the money and also give all of our children a vaccination that they don't actually need.
The decision not to immunise all children in the UK against chickenpox was taken in 2010 and is under review at the moment, with a new recommendation due next year. Jasper's family hope their arguments will be heard. The Department of Health says it has to be guided by expert advice. Catherine Jones, 5 News.
Now, what possesses someone to want to row across the Pacific Ocean almost 2,500 miles? Well, for some, it is the sense of achievement. For others, though, it's to prove a point. For Louie Bird, it was for his father, Peter, who died doing the same thing 20 years ago. Simon Vigar reports.
Another crazy Brit on another adventure.
Maybe, but there's a bit more to it than that. Louie Bird was doing it for Dad.
He was there the whole way with me. I really felt that. He was right in here, and I took a lot of strength from that.
I just have to have another glass of water and celebrate my 180th day at sea and my birthday.
In 1983, Peter Bird became the first man to row solo across the Pacific. Tragically, he was lost at sea on another expedition in 1996. Louie was just 4 years old.
You know, I don't necessarily have to go to the Pacific again because he's so much a part of me. He's so within me in everything that I do and everything that I represent, and that is a beautiful thing to realise.
It sounds like a spiritual trip.
Absolutely, 100%. It was always going to be, and I was happy that it was as much as I thought it would be. Just the idea, just this feeling, this overwhelming feeling that he was everywhere, and we were always going to get through.
Louie and his partner, Erden Erich, took 54 days to row 2,500 miles from California to Hawaii. OK, show us your blisters. Right. How much do they... they look bad. How much do they hurt?
They're fine now. My hand is the first 2 weeks, they're just ribbons. They're awful. They're absolutely fine. They're just hard calluses now. They get really, really tough. It's your bum that struggles. I mean, that's really sore.
And things got worse.
I ran out of whiskey with about 2 weeks to go. We were very good at just having a little bit now and again. Every other day we'd have a little sip. They went quicker than expected.
I'm homesick. I miss my family. I miss Louie very much.
And Louie admits there were quite a few tears from him.
I didn't think I would do that. I didn't think I'd feel right doing that, but it was emotional. I cried an awful lot out there. I was, at times just sobbing on the oars, rowing, getting out of my system, and then just talking to him, telling him about my life and how much he's missed, and that I hope I'm making him proud by doing this. And I think he would be proud.
Sometimes the destination is less important than the journey. Rarely has that saying been more true. Simon Viger, 5 News.
Good for Louie there. Well, that's all from us. Sean Welby has the weather next, and Charlotte Grant has updates throughout the evening. From all of us here, have a very good evening. Good night.